Evening and welcome to tonight's webinar on second intake for GP training. My name is Dr. Graham Lee and I'm the Deputy Director of Education and Training at GP Synergy. Firstly, we acknowledge the traditional owners of country wherever you may be joining the webinar from. GP Synergy pays our respects to elders past and present. This session is being recorded and your microphone and camera has been disabled to assist with internet connectivity. If you do have any problems with technical difficulties, please call Shirlene on the mobile number on the screen. There will be question time at the end of the webinar. If you have a question, please type it into the chat box and we will address your questions at the end of the presentation. Because the webinar is being recorded, I encourage you to ask your questions at the end of the session so that your personal questions are not necessarily shared to the entire internet. So tonight's presentation, we're going to talk about the role of GP Synergy in GP training. I'm going to cover a bit about the outline of the Australian General Practice training pathway. We'll also talk a bit about where you may be able to train for your GP training and also address some of the common questions that you may have about second intake. General practice can be a very rewarding career and it's fantastic that you're considering applying to general practice training. GP Synergy. We are one of many organisations involved with the Australian General Practice Training Pathway. As you can see on the screen here, there is the Department of Health, and the Department of Health is the federal funding body and administrator of the AGPT program. There are two colleges of general practice, the Australian College of Remote and Rural and Remote Medicine, and also the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners. The colleges are the ones that award fellowship. They set the requirements, standards, and the curriculum for training. They also determine the AGPT application and selection entry process, as well as managing program areas such as academic terms and other areas as well. GP Synergy is one of the regional training organisations that is accredited to deliver fellowship training for either ACRM and or RAC GP. We deliver to the college's curriculum and we have a key role in determining which applicants are given a final training offer through selection. As well as that, GP Synergy delivers education to registrars who are training on the AGPT pathway. We're also responsible for helping registrars with placements in GP terms. We guide registrars through the training requirements. Our experienced team also helps registrars with guidance and mentoring. And like I've mentioned already, all RTOs, including GP Synergy, have an important role to play in managing and deciding training offers. And GP Synergy's approach is that we want to provide individualized support to all registrars so they can attain fellowship. As you know, across Australia, the Commonwealth has determined a number of regional training organisation boundaries. In New South Wales and the ACT, GP Synergy is responsible for all three regional training organisation regions. namely Western New South Wales, Northeastern New South Wales, and Lower Eastern New South Wales. So what does Australian General Practice Training Pathway look like? As mentioned previously, there are a number of organisations involved with AGPT. It is a federally funded program by the Department of Health. It is a 3 or 4 year program depending on which college fellowship pathway you might be pursuing. But regardless of which college fellowship you might be thinking of, recognition of prior learning may be possible by application. And one of the key features of the AGPT program is that this is a general practice pathway that requires a combination of hospital and GP community terms. So firstly, an overview of ACRM training. As you can see on the diagram displayed, this is typically a 4-year training program. The first year being 12 months of core clinical training in hospital environments, followed by 2 years of PRT terms, which are commonly done in general practice, but could be done in other accredited settings as well. And 1 year of advanced specialized training, depending on the subspecialty topic chosen. So by default, ACRM is a 4-year training program. In comparison, our RACGP by default is a 3-year training program. Just like ACRM, the first year is 12 months of hospital training time of suitably accredited hospital terms, followed by 3 6-month community GP terms, and finishing off with 6 months of extended skills. This is the typical training pathway for RACGP. There is an optional 4th year to do advanced rural skills training, usually in an area of procedural medicine. And this may lead to an additional fellowship qualification called FAR GP. But otherwise, the default RACGP fellowship program is 3 years. So, how do you apply to second intake? You have 2 general practice colleges to choose from. You can apply to either the Australian College of Rural and Remote Medicine, or you could apply to the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners. Second round applications have already opened and will close on the 3rd of September at 10 a.m. And to apply, you need to apply through the college websites. In your selection application for round 2, you can nominate up to 4 training region preferences. And there are a limited number of places in the second intake for the training regions across Australia. What this means is not every single region may have capacity or places available in second intake. Each college also has different selection processes, which we'll cover in the following slides. Something to note is that for the Australian College of Rural and Remote Medicine, they're only offering selection to the rural pathway. So if you're thinking of applying to RACGP for the second round, some of you may have already participated in first round. If that applies to you, and you had applied in the first intake, but you were unsuccessful or declined a training offer, you do not necessarily need to sit the CCAT assessment again or pay the fee again. However, you will need to sit the MMR interviews if you're successful in being shortlisted. Please note, you are not able to preference the same training region and pathway combination if you had an interview for that training region and pathway in the first intake. If you are a first intake applicant and you have any further queries, please don't hesitate to contact the RACGP. If you had participated in first round intake and you had applied to ACRM in the first intake and declined a training offer, you will need to contact ACRM to discuss what your options are. If you applied to ACRM in the first intake, but you were unsuccessful in getting a training offer, unfortunately, you're not eligible to apply for second intake. If you are a first intake ACRM applicant and you have further questions around round 2, please don't hesitate to contact ACRM directly with your queries. What about the timelines of second round intake? You can apply from now until September the 3rd at 10 a.m. and you apply online for RACGP. Between the 3rd and 5th of October, for those who had not already participated in round 1, you will need to pay the selection fee and sit the assessment test. And this is called stage 1 assessment. If you are successful with stage 1 assessment, you might progress to stage 2 assessment. And in New South Wales and the ACT, interviews with GP Synergy will be occurring on Saturday, 3rd of November. And offers for second round will be going out on the 6th of November. So please ensure, if you are thinking of second round intake, that you're available for these dates. And on the 14th of November, new registrars to GP Synergy will be having an induction meeting by phone with a GP Synergy staff member to start the first steps of planning your GP training with GP Synergy. If you're thinking of round 2 ACRM selection, again, applications have now opened on the college website. You need to apply and submit all the documents for review. By 10th of September, pay the application fee and your application and documents will be reviewed. And if you're successful, you may progress to round 2. The dates for interviews with ACRM and GP Synergy are to be announced. But these will be occurring at this stage, tentatively in October. On the 6th of November, round 2 offers will be going out. This is the same date as the RACGP offers. And again, on the 14th of November, anticipate to have an induction meeting by phone with a GP Synergy staff member to start planning your GP training. So those are important timelines and dates to keep in mind, and encourage all of you who are thinking of round 2 applications to make sure you take note of these dates in your diaries. Where will you train? There are a number of factors that determine where you might be able to do your community GP training terms. And we're going to go through each of these items. You need to consider which training pathway you're eligible for, which RTO region you've been shortlisted to. In New South Wales and the ACT, also need to consider which sub-region you're selected into with GP Synergy, the training location obligations of your sub-region, and what training terms you might be doing. Firstly, training pathway. Some of you may be eligible for general pathway training. Some of you may only be eligible for rural pathway training. Rural pathway training means you can only do your community GP terms in modified Monash areas 2 to 7. In terms of your eligibility for general pathway or rural pathway, there are a number of factors that determine your eligibility, such as whether you completed your medical degree in Australia or overseas, whether or not you were an Australian citizen at the time of, for example, completing an Australian medical degree, and whether or not you're affected by the 10-year moratorium and can only train in a rural pathway. There are multiple combinations and permutations of factors that may affect you, and I encourage you to check your eligibility on the AGPT website, contact the colleges, and you can also have a look at the Modified Monash rural regions through the drconnect.gov.au website. As mentioned earlier, GP Synergy looks after 3 of the Commonwealth-defined training regions. Western New South Wales, which includes Canberra and the ACT, Northeastern New South Wales, which includes the northern part of Sydney and Newcastle, Lower Eastern New South Wales, which includes the southern part of Sydney, Wollongong, and the South Coast. When you are applying for selection, you will need to nominate up to 4 training regions for preferencing. Within the Commonwealth-defined regional training organisation boundaries, GP Synergy further subdivides each of those training regions into GP Synergy sub-regions. For Western New South Wales, there is the GP Synergy Western New South Wales sub-region and the Murrumbidgee and ACT sub-region. For Lower Eastern New South Wales, there is the South Eastern New South Wales sub-region and the Central, East and Southwest Sydney sub-region. For North Eastern New South Wales, there is Nepean, Western and Northern Sydney, Hunter Manning and Central Coast, North Coast sub-regions, and also New England and Northwest sub-regions as well. Why is this important for New South Wales and the ACT? This is because in addition to nominating up to 4 regional training organisation boundaries at selection, if you are shortlisted to one of those regional training organisation boundaries, GP Synergy will also be asking you to put in a preference for sub-region within the training region you've been shortlisted to. The sub-region allocation is made purely on the basis of merit. For RACHP applicants, it's dependent on their interview score. For ACRIM applicants, it is dependent on the document review and interview scores. There are exceptions to the sub-region allocation, merit allocation process. These include Australian Defence Force trainees, applicants who identify as Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander, and in New South Wales, GP Synergy also offers rural training pipeline priority applications. What is this application? The Rural Training Pipeline Priority Sub-Region Preferencing applications is an opportunity for applicants who have a demonstrated commitment to a rural sub-region to be considered for priority shortlisting to a particular GP Synergy sub-region. This application process is available for rural pathway only. And you have the opportunity to consider applying for this if you've been shortlisted to one of GP Synergy's RTO training regions. So how does this work? Let's say, for example, an applicant has a long-standing family and professional connection to Walgett in Western New South Wales. If during the selection process, they were successful in being shortlisted to Western New South Wales training region, an applicant may have the opportunity to apply for regional sub-region preferencing with a view of hoping to be able to train in GP Synergy Western sub-region. However, if an applicant was not successful in being shortlisted to Western New South Wales, and let's say instead they were shortlisted to Southeastern New South Wales, they wouldn't be able to submit sub-region preferencing application to GP Synergy Western New South Wales sub-region. Regardless of which sub-region you're selected into, the expectation is that you will complete all of your GP terms in that sub-region. The exception to this is that certain training terms like hospital training may be taken outside of the sub-region. So we ask all applicants to carefully consider the training region you preference and the sub-region you preference with GP Synergy. If you feel that you won't be able to undertake your GP training in the sub-region that you are successful in getting a training offer, our recommendation is have a think about whether you want to accept or decline the training offer. Before making final decisions, you're more than welcome to have a chat with GP Synergy staff to discuss how your training requirements could be met in the sub-region you've been selected into. But just a word of encouragement to consider your sub-region selections and acceptance of offer very carefully. How many second intake training places are available in New South Wales and the ACT? If you have a look at the slide here, you'll notice that there are no second intake positions available in Central, Eastern, South, Western Sydney, nor Nepean, Western, and Northern Sydney. All the other regions, depending on whether you're applying to rural pathway or general pathway with RACGP or ACREM, have varying number of second round places available. And you can see at a glance on this chart, the region which has the most vacancy at this point is Western New South Wales. Here's a map again, just showing the second intake places available. As you can see, there's no places available for second intake in Sydney. All the other locations have either rural pathway and or general pathway positions available. The fourth factor that affects where you can train for GP training in New South Wales and the ACT is GP Synergy's training location obligations. Each GP Synergy sub-region has its own training location obligations, and the sub-regions are divided into groups. To successfully complete GP training with GP Synergy, registrars are required to spend a minimum amount of time in various groupings within the sub-region they've been selected into. For further details of what the groupings are, what the boundaries of the groupings are, and how many groupings you need to rotate through, you can find that in the GP Synergy applicant pack. In addition, you can also find the information on the GP Synergy public website as well. Here is an example of GP Synergy sub-region training location obligation. This is a map of the Western New South Wales sub-region. And currently, all registrars who are training in this sub-region have to spend a minimum of 6 months in Group A, which is the blue-green area, or 12 months full-time equivalent in Group B, the khaki coloured area. So just an example of what training location obligations look like. And this example is 6 months full-time equivalent in Group A or 12 months in Group B. Each GP Synergy sub-region will have slightly different training location obligations, both in terms of the number of groupings and the number of groupings a registrar needs to complete during their training. So please refer to the applicant pack or GP Synergy's public website. A common question we get asked is, once you are in GP training, how do you get a GP job? At GP Synergy, all registrars have to re-enroll through our online management system every 6 months. This is an opportunity for registrars to confirm with GP Synergy what their training plans are for the following 6-month semester. Re-enrollment is also the first step to GP Synergy's term placement process. Registrars have an opportunity to put in preferences as to whether in the following 6-month semester they would like to train in their sub-region in Group A, B, or C as applicable. Registrars will then be allocated a grouping based on capacity and registrars' requirements to complete their training location obligations. Once a registrar has been assigned a grouping, you have the opportunity to apply to practices that are looking for registrars through GP Synergy's online management portal called G Prime. And from that point on, after you've applied to practice or practices will review your application, organize interviews, and once everybody agrees to a placement, confirm the placement through our online management system called G Prime. What this means is GP Synergy does not necessarily directly place registrars into general practices, but we provide the program and the tools for registrars to be matched to training practices, as well as meeting their training requirements and GP Synergy's training location obligations. So all these items that we've discussed, pathway, training region, sub-region, term placement, etc., will have an effect on where you end up doing your community GP placements. So, some common questions about GP training. For those of you considering training with the Australian College of Rural and Remote Medicine, ACRM currently allows up to 24 months of recognition of prior learning applications. As mentioned earlier in this presentation, the standard default training program for ACRM is a 4-year training program. This means, depending on what you've done previously, you may, by application and subject to approval, reduce your training time from 4 years by as much as 2 years. Only hospital rotations and other terms done after general registration are eligible for RPL for ACRM. RACGP also allows applications for recognition of prior learning. As mentioned earlier, the default standard RACGP training path is a 3-year training program. Up to a maximum of 12 months can be applied for recognition of prior learning, subject to approval. RPL for RACGP is generally available only for hospital training terms, and RACGP prefers RPL applications to apply to experience in the past 5 years. Though on a case-by-case basis, they may consider RPL applications for terms up to 10 years. And in general, any RPL terms for RACGP applications needs to be done after general registration. These are the general rules for both RACGP and ACRM for your consideration. Do you need to have specific experience? For the ACRM training program, your core clinical hospital training requirements need to cover general medicine, surgery, emergency, pediatrics, obstetrics, and anesthetics. Whether these are completed prospectively once you join GP training, or whether some of this is recognized by your prior experience, will be determined and discussed with you once you start GP training. For RACGP, there are some specific hospital terms that must be completed before you do your first community GP term. And this includes general medicine, surgery, emergency, and pediatrics, or its equivalent. You'll notice that for both ACRM and RACGP, the default standard training program, the first year is a hospital year. For ACRM, that's called core clinical training. For RACGP, that's called hospital term training. What this means is, if you are thinking of applying to GP training, if you haven't met some of these hospital term requirements yet, if you're successful in getting a GP training position through AGPT for the 2019 selection intake, you still have 2019 to find suitable hospital rotations to complete and start your community GP terms after you've completed the hospital requirements in 2019. A common question we get asked is, for example, for RACGP, pediatrics is a mandatory requirement before your first community GP term. What are the options if you can't get a pediatric term at a hospital? I would like to refer you to the RACGP's Pediatric Terms Requirements webpage. And on that webpage, it lists what could be acceptable as alternatives to a full 10-week pediatric term. And the options include, for example, 2 emergency terms of 10 weeks duration with minimum pediatric load. Another option could be 1 emergency term plus having completed the Diploma of Child Health program or the Sydney Child Health program. Please have a look at the specifics on the RACGP website under the Pediatric Term Requirement policy page. When can you start in a general practice term? Successful selection into AGPT does not automatically mean you can start in a GP term February 2019. For ACRM, the first year of the training program by default are 12 months of core clinical training time. If your prior experience is suitable, you might be able to apply for recognition of prior learning, but that is all subject to application and subject to approval. Similarly, for RACGP, successful selection for the 2019 intake year does not automatically mean you can start in a GP term in February 2019. The default training program, the first year is 12 months of hospital training. Just like ACRM, some RACGP registrars may not need to do the 12 months hospital training, but that is only if they have a suitable recognition prior learning application submitted and approved. And before the first GP term, registrars must complete all relevant mandatory hospital rotations mentioned earlier. Other things to consider if you're planning to apply for second round intake for the 2019 intake year. You can't start training in February by taking leave from AGPT. The AGPT pathway does allow for 6 months of leave from training by application, but you can't start training with leave. So keep that in mind, that if you are successful in second intake, be prepared to participate in an active training term from February next year. Can you transfer to another region? Transfers between training regions and transfers between sub-regions are generally not permitted during GP training. The current transfer policies only allow for transfer applications if a registrar has unforeseen and exceptional circumstances. The AGPT policies define unforeseen and exceptional circumstances, and you can find those definitions on the AGPT website. But basically, unforeseen and exceptional circumstances are things that we don't wish to happen to you. Things like major illness for yourself or your family and other serious things that happen in life. Secondly, even if you do meet the transfer criteria, transfers are generally not permitted in the first 6 months of training. This is why it is really important, as you consider which training region to apply for? And if you think of New South Wales and the ACT, which GP Synergy sub-region you might preference if you are shortlisted to GP Synergy, to carefully consider your ability to complete training in the sub-region you've been selected into. As you can see in the second intake information earlier, the majority of second intake positions available in New South Wales and the ACT in second intake are mostly in the rural regions. And I would encourage you, regardless of whether you are eligible for rural pathway only, or if you are eligible for general pathway and rural pathway, to consider the benefits of applying as a rural pathway registrar. Rural training can give you a very broad and diverse training experience. GP training is very short. Depending on which fellowship pathway you're undertaking, you could be spending as little as 18 months in a community general practice during your training. Your fellowship exams and assessments are intended to test you and see if you are suitable for unsupervised practice anywhere in Australia. This means the training experiences that are offered and available in rural regions can be extremely beneficial in terms of your progression as a GP and your success in passing training and the assessments. Rural training also offers additional opportunities that may not be readily available in urban regions, particularly in areas of GP procedural and GP rural generalist skills. As I've mentioned already, working in a rural region, you often get more exposure to a broad range of clinical medicine. And that is simply sometimes because in rural areas, access to other specialists can be more difficult. So the GP has a very important role to play in helping patients with those conditions. And in terms of community need, many rural regions really need GPs, and you'll find that as a rural pathway registrar training in a rural and remote region, there's a lot of professional satisfaction in being able to contribute to the needs of the community. And you'll also find that many of those rural communities will be welcoming you with open arms as well. So I encourage you, if you're thinking of GP training, to seriously have a think about the benefits of doing rural training. If you do have any further questions about second intake or GP training in general, for questions specific to GP training in New South Wales and the ACT, please don't hesitate to contact GP Synergy. And if you haven't done so already, request a GP Synergy applicant pack. For those of you who are considering including RTOs from other states in your preferencing, please contact the relevant regional training organisation in other states for any questions specific to training in those states or territories. If you have further questions about the selection processes for round 2, please contact either ACRM and or RAC GP, depending on which fellowship pathway you're hoping to train in. And for those of you who may have questions about your eligibility to undertake GP training via this AGPT pathway, Again, please don't hesitate to contact the colleges, but also the Department of Health's AGPT selection team is available to answer your queries, particularly around questions like, am I eligible for general pathway or rural pathway, or both? So that concludes the formal part of tonight's webinar. At this point, I just want to thank you for considering GP training. GP training is an extremely rewarding career. It is challenging, enjoyable, and I wish you all the best with second round intake. We're going to pause the recording, and this will be the opportunity for you to ask questions on the chat function. Please keep in mind that